So in an age when a lot of leaders, especially in politics, are able to bypass the traditional media through their own social media reach, we wanted to have a look and see if the world of finance is anywhere near being able to do the same thing. So we looked at Twitter and we looked at LinkedIn. In this first video, we'll focus on Twitter. Now, the first thing to say about Twitter is the old media's own status. They are very powerful on Twitter. We see the New York Times with the biggest followers of the sample that we looked at. And this sample, a selection of titles, of business titles, or titles that business people tend to look at frequently. New York Times, 45 million followers. The Economist, BBC World News, Reuters, all with in excess of 20 million, and many of the national titles such as Le Monde, The Guardian, and El País of Spain in the 7 to 8 million follower category. What this means is that when they're putting out a news story and your organisation is featured in it, they've got a big reach, multi-million reach. Interesting, the Times not quite so big, only 1.2 million followers, though that's grown from 1 million a couple of years ago. Now, when it comes to growth, the old media has been growing steadily on Twitter, 6 points or just over 6% average growth over the last 2 years. So how's finance stacking up in comparison? Well, we saw the Times with just over 1 million followers at the bottom end of the media titles we looked at. The biggest bank in the world in terms of Twitter following that we looked at, Citi, less than 1 million followers, and Goldman and Deutsche, more than 500,000, but the others behind those totals. So what does this mean? It means that when financial firms are putting out news stories of their own on Twitter, their reach is a tiny fraction of that achievable by the older media titles. The other point is growth. We've noticed that growth has slowed in terms of gaining followers within the financial world from 6% from 2018 to 19 down to 4.5% from 2019 to 2020. We see Citi and Deutsche flat year on year. And maybe part of the reason for maybe a sense of cooling of interest on Twitter is the lack of reach or the lack of penetration. So we looked at engagements in January, that's adding up comments, retweets and likes. And only one tweet in January by our sample of financial firms reached 1,000 engagements. We saw one from BlackRock, one from Goldman, that reached in excess of 500, but as a whole, the level of engagement is not that great.